Don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans again. We've had these Billy Joel tickets for months. My mother yelled, her voice bouncing off the walls of my hospital room. I sat there, stunned, clutching my phone with trembling hands. It was Christmas Eve at Chicago General Hospital, and I, Lauren Carter, was caught in a nightmare. My 2-year-old twins, Ethan and Sophie, played quietly in the corner, their small hands fiddling with scattered toys, blissfully unaware of the emotional storm breaking over me. A nurse named Clara checked my vitals, her eyes brimming with concern as she moved with quiet efficiency. The pain in my abdomen was excruciating, a relentless twisting that felt like a knife carving me open, but it was the look of indifference on my mother's face, beaming through the video call, that cut deeper than anything else. The hospital room was a cold, antiseptic shell, its walls painted a lifeless beige that seemed to swallow the faint buzz of machinery. It was Christmas Eve at Chicago General Hospital, and I, Lauren Carter, 33 years old, lay trapped in a bed that creaked with every shift of my aching body. The air carried a sharp tang of disinfectant, mingling with the distant sound of carols echoing from some far-off ward, a cruel reminder of the holiday I wouldn't get to share with my children. In the corner, my 2-year-old twins, Nathan and Lily, sat cross-legged on the linoleum floor, absorbed in their little world. Nathan nudged a blue block into place, his brow furrowed in toddler determination, while Lily clutched a worn teddy bear, whispering secrets to its threadbare ear. Their innocence was a fragile light in the gloom, untouched by the storm brewing inside me. My hands shook as I gripped my phone, the screen glowing with my mother's furious face. Her voice exploded through the speaker, loud enough to make the 4 stand beside me tremble. Don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans again. We've had these Billy Joel tickets for months. She screamed, each word a hammer striking my already fractured resolve. I stared at her image, stunned, the phone slippery in my sweating palms. The pain in my abdomen flared, sharp, searing, like a blade twisting deeper with every breath, but it was nothing compared to the icy detachment in her eyes. She didn't care that I was here, broken and bleeding. To her, I was an inconvenience, a smudge on the perfect evening she'd planned. 6 months ago, I'd lost Michael, my husband, my rock. His death had shattered me, leaving behind a widow with 2 babies and a mountain of grief I couldn't climb. Now, my body was betraying me too. The doctors had rushed me in earlier that day, their faces grim as they explained the internal bleeding. Complications from the relentless stress of those dark months. Emergency surgery loomed, a terrifying necessity scheduled for tonight, and I had no one to turn to. Friends were tied up with their own holiday plans, neighbors were strangers behind closed doors, and so I'd called my parents, desperate. I'd begged them to watch Nathan and Lily, to give me just this one night of support. But my father's voice followed my mother's, colder than the snow piling up outside. You're becoming a real nuisance and burden, Lauren, he said, his tone clipped, final. We're retired now. We deserve to enjoy our lives without your constant problems. A burden. The word landed like a punch, knocking the air from my lungs. For 3 years, I'd been sending them $2,800 every month. Over $100,000 total, since they'd taken early retirement with too little saved. I'd wired the money faithfully, month after month, to cover their mortgage, their dinners out, their carefree days, even as my own life crumbled. After Michael died, I'd kept sending it, scraping by on a widow's budget, believing family stuck together. I'd sacrificed sleep, savings, sanity, thinking they'd be there when I needed them. But here they were, choosing a Billy Joel concert and a night fawning over my flawless sister, Jessica, over their daughter and grandchildren. I was nothing to them but a bank account they'd drained dry. Tears welled, hot and bitter, but I blinked them away, glancing at Nathan and Lily. Nathan's block tower wobbled as he added a yellow piece, and Lily giggled, hugging her bear tighter. They didn't know their grandparents had just abandoned them, didn't feel the weight of that betrayal. My chest tightened, anger and exhaustion warring with the physical agony that pulsed through me. I wanted to scream, to hurl the phone across the room, but my strength was slipping, draining out with every heartbeat. A soft rustle broke my spiraling thoughts. Valerie, the nurse who'd been monitoring me, stepped closer. Her dark eyes shimmered with quiet compassion, a stark contrast to the harsh faces on my screen. She adjusted the 4-line with careful hands, then hesitated, her voice gentle but firm. Lauren, I overheard. I know someone, a professional nanny, Olivia. She's amazing with kids, and she might be free tonight. Should I call her for you?" Her words pierced the fog, a lifeline dangled in the dark. I met her gaze, my throat tight, and nodded. "Yes," I rasped, the decision solidifying in my chest. "Please call her. Help me." Valerie offered a small, steadying smile and slipped away to make the call. I sank back against the pillow, my eyes drifting to Nathan and Lily. The hurt still burned, raw and unrelenting, but something else flickered too, a spark of resolve. Whatever came next, I'd protect my babies. And maybe it was time to stop bleeding for people who'd never bleed for me. The hospital room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the hum of machinery blended with the faint clatter of Nathan and Lily's toys. I, Lauren Carter, lay there, my body a battlefield of pain and exhaustion, but my mind was drifting, pulled back to a lifetime of being the shadow in my own family. Jessica, my younger sister, had always been the golden child, the sun around which my parents orbited. I was the afterthought, the spare tire they never bothered to check until it blew out. The memories stung, sharp and relentless, each one a fresh cut on an old wound. Growing up, I'd learned early that my achievements didn't matter. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, top of my class, speech memorized, cap and gown pressed, my parents didn't show up. I stood on that stage, scanning the crowd for their faces, only to see empty seats where they should have been. Later, they claimed they'd had a flat tire, but I overheard my mother laughing on the phone with Jessica about how boring those ceremonies were anyway. When I got married to Michael, they grumbled the whole way to the venue, an hour's drive they deemed too far. They spent the reception sipping wine and whispering complaints instead of celebrating the day I dreamed of. And when Nathan and Lily were born, my miracles, my twins, they visited once, a fleeting hour in the maternity ward. My mother wrinkled her nose at the sound of Lily's cries, muttering, "Young kids are such a hassle," before they left to dote on Jessica's latest whim. I'd cradled my newborns alone that night, tears soaking the hospital pillow, wondering why I was never enough. The unfairness didn't stop there. It deepened, carved into my bones with every year. I'd poured myself into being the daughter they could rely on, even when they never returned the favor. 3 years ago, when they took early retirement with barely a dime saved, I stepped in. I started sending them $2,800 every month, $33,600 a year, over $100,000 total, to keep their house out of foreclosure, to fund their golf outings and dinners at steakhouses I couldn't afford for myself. It wasn't easy. I'd sit up late, balancing my budget on a cracked laptop, cutting corners on groceries so they could have their comfort. When Michael died 6 months ago, the world caved in. I was drowning, grieving, raising twins alone, scraping by on his meager life insurance, but I kept sending the money. Every month, I'd wire it, my fingers trembling over the transfer button, telling myself family helped each other. That's what I'd been raised to believe, wasn't it? That blood meant sacrifice, loyalty, love. What a fool I'd been. The truth hit me now, lying in this hospital bed on Christmas Eve, my abdomen throbbing with every shallow breath. I wasn't their daughter, I was their ATM, a lifeline they'd tapped until it ran dry. They'd taken my money, my time, my trust, and given nothing back. Not a single call after Michael's funeral to check on me. Not a visit to see Nathan and Lily grow. And now, when I needed them most, facing emergency surgery, begging them to watch their grandchildren, they'd turned their backs. A Billy Joel concert and Jessica's perfect little life mattered more than my survival, more than the twins they'd barely acknowledged. I'd spent years chasing their approval, bleeding myself dry for it, and all I'd earned was their scorn. The room blurred as tears welled up, hot and heavy, but I swallowed them down. Nathan giggled in the corner, stacking a wobbly tower of blocks, while Lily hummed to herself, her tiny voice a soft balm against the ache. They were all I had left, my reason to keep going. I couldn't let this break me, not now, not when they needed me to be strong. The pain in my gut flared, a cruel reminder of the surgery looming just hours away, and I clenched my fists against the sheets, willing myself to hold on. A gentle tap on my arm pulled me back. Valerie, the nurse with the kind eyes, stood beside me, her clipboard tucked under one arm. She'd been a quiet presence all night, checking my vitals, adjusting the four with a tenderness that felt foreign after my parents' coldness. "Lauren," she said, her voice low but steady. I reached Olivia. "She's the nanny I mentioned. She'll be here in an hour to take care of Nathan and Lily. She's wonderful, I promise." Her words were a lifeline, a thread of hope in the dark. I nodded, my throat tight with gratitude I couldn't voice. "Thank you," I whispered, the sound barely audible over the beep of the heart monitor. Valerie gave a small nod and stepped away, leaving me with the weight of her news, and the weight of everything else. An hour. In 60 minutes, a stranger would step in where my family wouldn't, cradling my children while I faced the unknown of the operating table. I stared at the ceiling, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows, and let the realization settle over me like a cold rain. My flesh and blood family had never seen me as a priority. I'd been a tool, a means to an end, discarded the moment I stopped being useful. My parents hadn't just abandoned me tonight. They'd been abandoning me my whole life, and I'd been too blind, too desperate for their love to see it. But now I did. The fog lifted, and the truth stood stark and unyielding. I'd given them everything. My money, my heart, my trust, and they'd thrown it away for a pair of concert tickets. Nathan laughed as his tower toppled, and Lily clapped her hands, oblivious to the shift inside me. I wasn't their daughter anymore, not in any way that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was freedom. As the clock ticked closer to Olivia's arrival, I felt something harden in my chest. Not bitterness but determination. I'd survive this night, this surgery, this betrayal. For my twins. For myself. And I'd never let them take from me again. The hospital bed was a flimsy raft in a tempest, the sheets plastered to my sweat-soaked skin as I waited for the surgical team to whisk me away. The pain in my abdomen pulsed, a savage beat sinking with the turmoil in my chest, but my mind was a honed blade, carving through years of fog. I, Lauren Carter, had hit my limit. Before the anesthesia could dull me, I grabbed my phone with trembling hands, its glare slicing through the dimness. Nathan and Lily played on in the corner, their soft giggles a lifeline, as I opened my banking app. My finger hovered over the recurring transfer, $2,800 every month, a relentless drain I'd fed for my parents' comfort. 3 years. Exactly $100,800. It stopped now. I tapped the screen, canceling the automatic payments with a resolve that shook me. Transaction cancelled flashed up, and I exhaled, a ragged breath I'd held too long. But I wasn't finished. I flipped to my messages, thumbs pounding out a text to my parents. "I'm not sending money anymore. Don't contact me." I sent it before doubt could drag me back, the words cold and final against the white glow. The phone clattered onto the bedside table, and a surge crashed through me, freedom rough and uncharted, like snapping chains I'd worn raw. I'd carried them too long, and now I was shedding them. The surgical team arrived soon after, their masked faces a blur, as they wheeled me down the hall. Nathan and Lily would be safe with Olivia, the nanny Valerie had promised, and I'd face this alone, no family, no cushion, just me and my twins against the flood. The anesthesia hit, a frigid tide pulling me under, and I let it take me with an odd calm. Whatever came next, I'd claimed something for myself. For once, I wasn't groveling for their scraps. I woke in recovery hours later, groggy and raw, the world a haze of beeping machines and antiseptic sting. My abdomen ached beneath fresh bandages, a muted fire where the surgeons had stitched me back together, but I'd survived. A nurse murmured about success, bleeding stopped, crisis contained, but my focus sharpened when I reached for my phone. It blazed with notifications, 29 missed calls, a torrent of texts, a frenzied assault from the family I'd cut loose. My parents had erupted, and the wreckage was a bitter triumph. My father's messages struck first, a volley of rage and entitlement that clenched my jaw. "You can't do this. We've got a Hawaii trip booked next month, non-refundable. How dare you pull this now?" I stared, disbelief twisting into a sour scoff I couldn't voice. A Hawaii trip. They'd been plotting paradise on my $2,800 a month while I bled out, begging for help they wouldn't give. Another text, "You owe us, Lauren. We raised you. This is how you repay us." Raised me? They'd kept me fed, clothed, sure, but love? Support? That had been Jessica's birthright, the daughter they crowned, while I faded into shadow. Then Jessica's name flared up, a beacon I'd never outrun. Her text oozed the ignorance only a golden child could carry. Mom says it's just a minor surgery. What's going on? Why's everyone freaking out? I read it twice. Her nonchalance a blade sharper than the surgeon's cut. Minor surgery. That's what they'd spun for her, shrinking my life or death fight into a blip, to shield their perfect lie. Fury flared, hot and fierce, and I gripped the phone tighter. They'd buried the truth, or maybe they'd convinced themselves I didn't count. Either way, I was done being their phantom. I typed back to Jessica, raw and unsparing, the truth I'd choked down too long. Minor surgery? I'm in recovery from emergency surgery for internal bleeding. I asked Mom and Dad to watch Nathan and Lily tonight, and they refused, said I'm a burden. I've been sending them $2,800 a month for 3 years, $100,800 total, even after Michael died, and they picked a Billy Joel concert over me. That's what's going on. I sent it, pulse racing, and waited. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken shock, until she replied, "Wait, what? They never told me any of that." Of course they hadn't. Jessica had glided through life in their cocoon, blind to the ruin they'd made of me. My phone buzzed again. My father, relentless. "You're selfish, Lauren. We'll lose the house without that money. You're destroying our lives." Selfish. It scorched, but it didn't stick, not now. I'd been selfless too long, pouring everything into them, while they gorged on my sacrifice. My mother's text followed, "You're overreacting. Call us when you calm down." Calm down? I'd nearly died, and they'd left me to sink. There was no calming that. I flipped the phone face down, snuffing its glow, and sank back into the pillow. Nathan and Lily were safe with Olivia now, and I was here, alive, awake, unbound. The fallout was theirs to choke on. For the first time, I wasn't the one drowning. 3 months had passed since the hospital, a blur of healing scars, quiet nights with Nathan and Lily, but the silence from my parents had been a heavy void. I, Lauren Carter, had rebuilt something in that time, a fragile, hard-won piece, until their shadows loomed at my door. It was a crisp March afternoon, the wind still sharp, and I was stirring soup on the stove when the doorbell pierced the calm. Nathan and Lily scampered behind me, laughing over a mismatched puzzle. As I wiped my hands, opened the door. There they stood, my mother, my father, faces taut with desperation, eyes flickering like trapped prey. My father spoke first, voice clipped, insistent, "We need $149,000 to save the house, Lauren. The bank's foreclosing." 3 months behind. His words hit hard, a brazen slap, and I blinked, stunned by the nerve. 3 months, the exact span since I'd stopped sending $2,800 a month, $100,800 total over 3 years. Money they'd burned through while I lay bleeding in a hospital bed. I crossed my arms, ice settling in my chest, and said, "Sell your Mercedes, Dad." His jaw dropped, eyes wide, as if I'd suggested arson. "We take a loss on it," he barked, hands waving. "That car's worth more to us than." He faltered, unable to finish, but my mother cut in, voice shrill. "We can't just sell it. You don't get it, we lose too much." I stared at them, their tailored coats, polished shoes, and a cold laugh broke free. "You shouldn't have spent so recklessly then," I replied, tone flat, firm. "That's not my problem anymore." They froze, shock rippling across their faces, but I felt nothing, no guilt, no tug, just a steady calm I'd forged alone. 3 months ago, I'd severed their lifeline, cancelled the payments from a hospital bed, and I'd survived. The surgery had left a scar, a faint line on my abdomen, but it paled next to the one they'd etched into my life. I'd paid my bills, fed my twins, kept us afloat without their weight, and now they stood here, begging for $149,000, like I was still their cash machine. My mother shifted, her face softening into a practiced mask, and she peered past me, spotting Lily by the couch. My daughter clutched her teddy bear, wary, silent, as my mother crouched, voice cloying. "Look, Lily, Grandma brought you a gift." She pulled a cheap, plastic-wrapped doll from her purse, offering it like bait. Lily didn't budge, instead pressing against my leg, her small hand gripping my jeans. She didn't know them, not truly. 3 years of absence, 2 years of her life, and their single hospital visit had faded from her mind. Nathan peeked out, curious, unsure, but stayed back, his trust as absent as hers. My mother's smile wavered, her hand still outstretched, but I stepped forward, blocking her view. "You've never truly been their grandparents," I said, voice low, sharp, and slammed the door. The thud rang through the house, a full stop to their goal, and I leaned against it, breathing hard. Lily tugged my leg, whispering, "Who's that, Mommy?" And I knelt, smoothing her hair. "No one important, sweetheart," I murmured, heart twisting yet steady. Outside, my father's voice surged, muffled, angry. "Lauren, open this door. You can't treat us like this." I didn't stir, didn't flinch, just listened as my mother chimed in, pleading now. "We're your family, don't do this." Family. That word once held sway, guilt, duty, but now it was empty, a husk they'd hollowed out. I'd spent my life chasing their love, pouring $100,800 into their hands, thinking it would earn me a place. But they'd taken it all, left me bleeding on Christmas Eve, and now demanded more, $149,000, to prop up their crumbling world. I straightened, returned to the stove, as their voices faded into the breeze. Nathan and Lily resumed their puzzle, giggling over a stubborn piece, and I stirred the soup, its warmth cutting the chill they'd brought. 3 months ago, I'd faced surgery alone, Nathan and Lily with a stranger, because my parents chose a concert over us. 3 months ago, I'd seen the truth, they'd never valued me, and I'd cut them off, texted from a hospital bed, "Don't contact me." They'd ignored that, 29 calls, endless texts, but I'd held firm. And now here they were, proving I'd been right to walk away. My father pounded the door again, voice breaking. "You owe us, Lauren. We raised you." Raised me? They'd housed me, fed me, but love had been Jessica's realm, the golden child they'd polished while I rusted. My mother's sobs seeped through, staged, pitiful. "We'll lose everything, please." Everything. Their house, their car, their trips, all propped up by my $2,800 a month, while I'd scraped by after Michael's death. I'd kept sending it, grieving, broke, thinking family meant sacrifice. How blind I'd been. I set the spoon down, hands calm, and glanced at my twins. Nathan grinned, fitting a puzzle piece. Lily hugged her bear, safe, unaware. They were my family, my fight, and I'd shield them from this venom. The knocking ceased, footsteps retreating, but I knew they'd return, demand more, because I'd only ever been a resource to them. But I wasn't that Lauren anymore. Not the one who begged, bled, broke for them. I ladled soup into bowls, called Nathan and Lily to the table, as their presence dissolved. 3 months had tempered me, taught me my worth, and I wouldn't yield. Not for $149,000, not for their tears, not for a past that never held me. The door stayed shut, the line drawn, and I sat with my twins, their chatter filling the void. For the first time, I stood my ground, not just for them but for me. A year had passed since I'd slammed the door on my parents, and the fallout had unraveled them completely. Jessica called one night, voice trembling, spilling the mess they'd hidden. They'd remortgaged the house, blown the equity on a Mercedes, designer clothes, lavish trips. The $149,000 they'd begged me for, it was just the tip of their collapse. The bank took the house, the car was repossessed, and I, Lauren Carter, didn't care. Their ruin didn't stir me, not a flicker of guilt, just a quiet shrug as I hung up, turned back to Nathan and Lily, their laughter filling my small, steady home. I'd healed in that year, body and soul, building a life from the ashes they'd left me in. The scar on my abdomen faded, a thin reminder of that Christmas Eve, but the deeper wounds, those from decades of neglect, were finally scabbing over. I threw myself into graphic design, freelancing late into the night. Logos, websites, a lifeline of my own making. Olivia stayed on. Not just a nanny now, but a friend, her calm presence a gift to Nathan and Lily while I worked. I found a community too, a group of single moms, women who'd fought their own battles, shared coffee and stories, taught me joy wasn't a myth. For the first time, I wasn't alone. Not really. Then came the letter, handwritten, creased, slipped through my mail slot one gray morning. My mother's script, "I've failed as a mother, Lauren. I see that now." My father's followed, shaky, uneven, "I've started therapy, trying to change." I read it once, twice, then set it aside, untouched by the words. Apologies after a lifetime of indifference. They felt like echoes, not anchors. I didn't owe them tears. Not after $100,800, not after they'd chosen a concert over my twins. I folded the paper, tucked it away, let it sit, unanswered. A year after the hospital, March wind rattling the windows, I agreed to meet them. A quiet cafe downtown, neutral ground, Nathan and Lily safe with Olivia. They sat across from me, smaller somehow, diminished. My mother's eyes were red, her hands twisting a napkin. My father's face crumpled, wet with tears I'd never seen. I've been a terrible father, he choked, voice breaking, his shoulders heaving with sobs. I failed you, I failed them. My mother nodded, mute, fragile, but I sat still, arms crossed, heart guarded, unmoved. Their words hung there, raw, desperate, but forgiveness didn't rush in. Not after decades of being the afterthought, the ATM, the burden. I leaned forward, voice low, steady. If you really want to change, prove it, no promises, no softness, just a challenger line in the sand. My father wiped his face, nodding fast, while my mother reached out, stopped short, her hand trembling. We'll try, she whispered, but I didn't reply, just stood, left them there, coffee cooling untouched. I walked out, spring air sharp against my skin, and felt the shift solidify. I wasn't the Lauren who'd begged for their love, who'd sent $2,800 a month, who'd broken herself for their approval. That girl was gone, buried under the weight of their neglect, risen anew in the quiet strength I'd built. I was a mother now, fierce, unyielding, shielding Nathan and Lily from the toxicity I'd endured. They'd never know the sting of being unwanted, not from me, not from anyone I let near them. Back home, Nathan tackled me with a hug, Lily trailing behind, giggling, and I scooped them up, heart full, steady. The letter sat on my desk, unanswered, unimportant, because my life wasn't theirs anymore. My parents might change, might not, but I wouldn't wait, wouldn't bend, not for tears, not for promises. I'd spent too long in their shadow, chasing scraps, until I'd learned to stand in my own light. I tucked the twins into bed that night, their soft breaths a rhythm of peace, and stood at the window, city lights blurring below. A year ago, I'd nearly died, abandoned, bleeding, while they danced to Billy Joel. Now I'd carved a life, friends, work, my children, free of their chains. The past was theirs to wrestle, I wouldn't carry it. I turned away, smiling faintly, and whispered to the dark, for the first time in my life, I truly feel free.